I'm Philip Khoury. I have the great privilege of serving as Vice Provost for the Arts at MIT, and I want to welcome you to an artist talk with Devlin, the extraordinary multidisciplinary artist we honor today with the Eugene McDermott Award in the Arts at MIT. I'd also like to welcome back to MIT Mary McDermott Cook. Mary, we're thrilled you're here, coming up from Dallas to be with us. It's a splendid occasion, and when McDermotts are in the house, yet more splendid. The McDermott Award was created in honor of Mary's father, Eugene, by his wife and Mary's mother, Margaret. The McDermott family has been among the most generous benefactors to MIT, and we're extremely grateful for their commitment to our institution, especially to the arts and to support of undergraduates in our institution. Devlin creates visionary kinetic stage designs for theater and opera, from the unforgettable revolving stage for the Lehman trilogy to the recent rake stage, a boat that can tilt and could tilt in 20 directions for the Royal Shakespeare Company's Hamlet, Ez's third Hamlet. Ez works across an unprecedented range of scales. She's designed extraordinary performances for the Royal Opera House, the Metropolitan Opera, and numerous European locations, and she has created monumental illuminated stage architectures for arena and stadium tours by many superstars, including Beyoncé, U2. U2, that meant Bono, didn't it? Yeah, he's a friend of MIT, and Lady Gaga, as well as Olympic ceremonies and Super Bowl halftime shows. Ez invites communal participation in her own artwork, public sculptures, exhibitions, art installations seen at the Tate Modern, the Victoria and Albert Museum, Trafalgar Square, the United Nations General Assembly. She's known as an exceptional poet of light for her evocative narrative use of intense light and color. A recent installation for the Milan Design Week, Library of Light, received 52,000 visitors in the first 3 days. She also has fearlessly explored new artistic frontiers, such as the use of AI to collectively author poetry, most strikingly the poem Pavilion, the first UK pavilion by a woman architect for a World Expo, where she created an animated facade that seemed to extrude poetry generated from the assembled contributions by the many visitors. Ez's rapidly growing concern for contemporary climate and social crises has her exploring biodiversity, species extinction, and the complicated structures of human separation and connection. Her art is technically daring, yet emotionally precise, engaging topics that currently are of great interest at MIT. Ez, we are so delighted you're here. You honor us by coming to MIT. Thank you. There's more. I can think of no person better situated to help us explore the unparalleled scope of Devlin's art than Paola Antonelli, the Senior Curator of Architecture and Design and Founding Director of Research and Development at MoMA, at the Museum of Modern Art. Paola Antonelli's exhibitions, lectures, writings address design's intersection and interaction with other fields, from technology and biology to popular culture, and with life. An architect trained at the Polytechnic of Milan, she has been named one of 25 design visionaries in the world by Time magazine and has earned numerous awards. Most importantly for a number of us in this room, she is a true colleague and friend of MIT. She not only exhibits the work of MIT artists, for which we're grateful, and so are they, but she's also a member of the advisory committee to the Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning, and most recently she served on the Committee on the Future of the Arts at MIT, which our provost commissioned and which is about to appear and will be argued and debated, and it's very exciting. We haven't had a report of this kind in a long time. So please join me in welcoming Devlin and Paola Antonelli. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and hello. It's good to be with you again. Yay, it works.
Hello.
And we know that we're at MIT when everybody giggles with laughter and delight at a description of the artist on the dais as string theory. I love that everybody was like, we know. So, so tonight we're gonna go on a ride in Ez's mind and brain. Actually, literally, you will see her brain. But since there's so much to explore and so much to talk about, what we're going to do is we're gonna have slides of her work that are gonna flow behind us. And then we have Heidi Erickson, who heroically will be womaning the computer and will call up, when possible, slides that refer to the discussion that we'll be having at any time. So just let yourself go, think of questions, because we're gonna also have a Q&A. And don't try to follow logically, just let yourself be driven by the emotions and by the feelings that Ez will try and the meanings that Ez will try to compart to us. So I'm going to start by asking you, of the many dimensions, of the 11 dimensions in your life, this is a new adventure, new and old. You're at MIT and you spent a week here. So I would like to know what you found. What are your impressions? And what is the potential that you see here for an artist like you and other artists?
Well, firstly, thank you to everyone in this room who made this award and this week possible. I'm looking at Mary. And it's been an extraordinary week. I guess in answering your question most directly, what I've discovered, most importantly, is the humility of the people I've met here. I've met probably some of the most intelligent, most informed, most wise people I have ever met. And yet, what struck me even more than their brilliant intelligence is their profound humility and curiosity in the face of what they might yet still discover.
Was it really MIT that you... Okay.
Okay. I expected there to be more skepticism towards me, who's rocking up, having read my popular science. I roll up with my James Gleick and my Carlo Rovelli and my Brian Greene and my Ian McGilchrist, who I'll surely talk about. And I expected a kind of wry, one eyebrow raised, kind of, okay, she's read a few popular science books. But I didn't meet that. I met only curiosity and only actually quite a sense of urgency in the communities here, desire to connect with art, to connect with a different mode of attention, and to meet itself. That was really, when we planned this residency, I said to Leela and Sarah, who came to meet me in London, I'm coming to you for a week. What do you need from this residency? You have given me the great honor of this extraordinary award and recognition and invitation, but what can I offer you? What do you need? What could all these extraordinary scientists need from me? And really the answer was, we would like to meet ourselves. We would like to be able to speak of things we sometimes can't speak of. So we started to look at ways we could speak to one another here, perhaps without words.
Do you feel that there have been some very hard conversations that wouldn't have been possible without an interlocutor like you?
I mean, what I will say is I'm not sure that we would have had these extraordinary 11 drawing sessions where people who, some of them may be here. Hands up if you took part in the drawing session. Is there anyone here?
Wow.
There's a few people here,
Great.
Quite a lot. Yeah. Thank you for coming. So they came and they sat in a beautiful environment, which I've just visited today, and they met with complete strangers, and they didn't speak to begin with. They sat just listening to music, and they drew one another, whether they were proficient in drawing or not. They met each other face to face for a sustained amount of time. I don't think that would have happened otherwise. Probably it's not something we habitually do. It's a great privilege to sit with a stranger, and not something we usually do for a sustained amount of time, and really look at each other, gaze.
And that's really also what mostly inspired Leela, I think. I mean, they were already set on you, of course. Why would they not? But when they came to London, they also had the opportunity to experience congregation, which is what this experience here at MIT comes from. So can you please talk about congregation? Because the story of how you came to it is quite unique.
Okay, shall I give the long version?
Yeah, I know, it's beautiful.
We're all settled in. We're all comfortable, right? You can hear us okay? Are you comfortable?
I'll stop you if it's too long.
No, yeah.
Don't worry.
Tell me if it's getting boring. All right, this began, I get asked to do projects in all sorts of different modes and ways of approach. And this one was an invitation to make a project about Londoners specifically. And I didn't quite know what to do with the invitation. So I said, can I make it about Londoners that are more than human, that are not human? And of course, it turns out there are 15,000 species of Londoners, one of which is human. And I thought it would be good to learn my community of Londoners and how to meet them. I wanted to draw them. I thought the best way would be a rather humble observation, actually tracing. It was tracing drawing over projected photographs. And I couldn't do 14,999 and still do all the other stuff I do. So I asked the London Wildlife Trust, and they recommended 243 London animals that are most at risk of extinction. So I sat for about 4 months while I was doing other stuff. Actually, there was one drawing I did. I was in a hotel on 8th Street in New York, and it was a Pride Day. And the Pride Parade with glistening iridescent people was walking past the window, and I was tracing over an iridescent moth. And it was a magical few hours. And I did these things, quite painstakingly. And at the end of that project, I was asked rather aggressively by Hans Ulrich Obrist at the Serpentine, where was my poster that I had promised him for the Back to Earth exhibition? So in a kind of fit of exhaustion late at night, I placed my hand on the piece of paper, I drew around my hand, and I cut out prints of these drawings and stuck them on. The drawing was made with no planning, with no real logical sense of why I was doing this. It was made out of slight desperation and exhaustion, but I will say it's probably the most articulate expression of what that period of time had really resulted in, which was a sense of porosity between self and other, a recognition of the continuity of forms from the bifurcating veins on the back of my hand to those same bifurcating veins on the back of one of the many bats I was drawing, or the shape of the knuckles, the shape of the bird's wing. While I was doing this, I noticed also that my community in London were becoming more porous themselves to other, because the Ukraine war had begun, and something I'd never experienced, having grown up under Margaret Thatcher mainly in the 80s, I had never experienced this sense of opening that England was entering into towards Ukraine. So refugees were being invited in. My parents had 5 people living with them. The schools were opening, the ports were opening, the train stations. And yet, in parallel to this aperture and porosity was this discourse of stop the boats, invasion on the borders towards those who were trying to come from Sudan or Somalia or Congo. And I wanted to understand the dissonance between these porosity and fermeture and closeness. So I went to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and they asked me if I would make a project. And I said, what if I make portraits of 50 people who have come to bring their gifts to London, having been displaced? And it became clear that the way to do this, if I really wanted to understand the dissonance in my community, I needed to find it in myself first. I needed to meet it. I needed to meet my own unconscious biases at work. I wouldn't be able to find them if I didn't expose myself to them. So each day, there would be a knock on the door, a complete stranger would come in. I knew only their first name and that they had refugee stamped in their passport. But they could have come 25 years ago, they could have come 6 months ago. I didn't know the circumstances. I didn't know how long they had called London home. And for the first 45 minutes, I looked into their eyes and I drew them. And I asked them to think about their gift. I wanted them to co-author the work. So they each held a shoebox, an award box I had lying around. And they told me what to put as their gift in that box. Then at the end of the drawing, they told me their story. And they were exhibited in St Mary Le Strand Church outside Somerset House with a kind of sonnet lumière projected on them. Each one spoke, and their gift came to life. And it was surrounded with choirs, and a lot of people came.
And that's what you brought here. Yeah, you said very clearly it was about meeting your bias or just meeting the other, right? And then you brought it here, or Leela brought it here to MIT. And how many different people went through the experience of drawing each other?
Just over 100, right? We have some of our colleagues here who worked on it. Just over 100 people took part. And we had an extraordinary session with them describing what it was like for them to meet one another in this way.
Yeah, it would be wonderful if somebody's here and afterwards during the Q&A, they want to give us a little bit of their own feedback. So remember, we're talking about exploring London, thinking first and foremost of the more than human, of the species that are on the way to extinction. Then through an exhaustion one night, that hand that comes out of the experience of the more than human, and that shows the continuity with the rest of the world and with London, and then you move into congregation. And this is all continuing with your most current obsession, which is expanding yourself even more. So can you talk about your study now of the brain?
Well, I've decided there's a new thing you should do if you come to MIT, which is to get an MIT selfie.
Yeah.
And this is it. So I'm not sure if Hope Keane is here, who took this selfie with me a few days ago.
We were admiring her corpus callosus.
John Gutag said to me while we were preparing for the AI aspect of this residency, he asked me an important question and said, what appetite do you have for the unpredictable when you come here? And Leela had spent such a long time preparing this week in great detail. And of course, the day I arrived, I said, I've just read this book by Ian McGilchrist. 2 books. One is called The Master and His Emissary, that was written in 2009. And the other one is The Matter with Things, that was written in 2021. And I had read the first one in 2012, and it sort of lodged in me, but it became more urgent to read the second one recently. And I said, listen, I've been reading these books, and I would like to see my own brain. Could that be arranged? And the next day, there we were, literally within about 17 hours. And I must say, I'm blown away by this image. It's my favorite photograph of me that's ever been taken. I really love it. Hands up anyone who's had their brain scanned.
Well, I would expect more here.
Guys, is Hope Keane here? Guys, you got customers. You got customers, Hope. So I had seen images recently coming out of Paris of the new, someone will correct me, but something to do with 11.7 being the strength, a very strong brain fMRI scanner. And the images look to me probably tiny bit more high resolution, of course, but the basic message is this, is that there's a beautiful tree in our brain. To me, as an artist, I just read this as a coral. And it blows my mind that that is there. And so I wanted to meet my own coral in my mind, and I did. And also the corpus callosum, the part that joins the 2 hemispheres of the brain together, I have been assured that mine is really good. And it's there. It's that kind of beautiful arch, that rainbow in the middle that you see around a white arch over the dark area. That's the area that connects the 2 hemispheres. And of course, you know, having spoken today to Professor Pawan Sinha, who I hope is here somewhere, he gave me all sorts of insight today. And it may be that my reading of Ian McGilchrist is very partial, but I'll share it with you. What he suggests is that perhaps and it's very much a contention, perhaps one of the reasons that we have these two hemispheres is perhaps that they express two modes of attending to the world. And perhaps it originated in a mode of attending that needed to separate things, to divide them, to label them, in order to determine what was food, what was useful, what was a resource, what was a tool. And another mode of attention that actually needed to recognize a continuity with the world and a sense of horizon and breadth to not become food itself. So one half is looking for food, one half is looking to not be food. And that made a lot of sense to me, and that perhaps over the millennia, perhaps there has been somewhat of a disequilibrium between that mode of attending to the world as if the world were a resource and were to be used and were to be a tool and to be labeled and named and separated. Perhaps with all the great things that come of that, perhaps slightly to the detriment of viewing the world as a continuity with self and as a symbiosis with self.
It's not the first time you use your own body as a way to explore the world outside. And you have this holy grail of the embodiment of emotions and of just being, of existence. So I wonder if we could call up Mirror Maze, and if you could talk about, you're seeing that I'm jumping around, but it's the only way really to explore as this works. So Mirror Maze is another way to think of the body as reflected outside, but this time about the lungs.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Heidi, if you go from Mirror Maze to Forest of Us, so this came about, again, another bit popular science, forgive me. I read James Gleick's 1987 book, Chaos, in about 2003, and it changed my view. I viewed the world through James Gleick's glasses ever since. And what I took away from that book, I probably took away a lot less than he put into it, but the key thing that I took away was that the bifurcating structures that I see around me in my arteries, in trees, in the way that water drops fall down my windscreen are all governed by the same maths underlying so many things. And I started to look, it was the first time I'd seen a really high resolution image of the bronchial trees within our lungs. And to any of you who have been educated in the science of things, it would perhaps seem obvious that a structure that was going to dedicate itself to exchange of gases would want to bifurcate in order to expand to the greatest extent its surface area in order to be most efficient at the exchange of gas, in this case, oxygen and carbon dioxide. But I didn't know that. So for me to recognize that there's a tree inside me, effectively, because it's busy exchanging gas in the way that a tree is, that visual symmetry, once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. And it seemed to me that a worthwhile piece of art might be one that allowed people to walk through it. So what happened in these slides that you're seeing was I started to make drawings, tracing over X-rays. It wasn't, in fact, my own lungs, because I wasn't at MIT and I couldn't get them done. It was actually during the lockdown where lungs had, in fact, become a war zone. I was at home looking at lungs in books, and I traced over lungs, I traced over trees. I just felt in my hand the stuff I'd read in James Gleick nearly 20 years earlier. And then I began to cut them out and make sculptures out of paper, is what I had to hand. And then I started to extrude from that into a maze. And this was really drawing on the practice of, I was brought up a Catholic, and one of the things that we learned when we were kids was we would follow the rosary. We would, our fingers would feel and count these beads, and words would come sort of automatically from the feeling in the fingers. And I learnt about the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral, that if you couldn't afford to make the pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 13th century, you would walk around that labyrinth, and you would think and pray with your feet and with the edges of your arms and with the hairs on the edge of your arms. And it seemed to me that this was an interesting way to invite people to take in information, not just through their eyes and their ears, but through their feet. So this maze has actually been there. It was meant to be there for a year, but they've kept it up. It's there for 5 years in Miami opposite the Rubel Museum, and it's called Forest of Earth.
Mm-hmm. So continuity with the body and continuity with nature, and also continuity between your brain and what you read and your work. So we talked about Gilchrist, we talked about Gleich. What about Abraham and becoming animal? Because this is also another one of your, not really obsessions, but just guiding threads in your work.
I guess what I'm longing to do is to find out why, brilliant as we are, what a piece of work is man, right? From Hamlet. Brilliant as we are, why are we not an 8 billion strong collective force for sustaining equilibrium on this beautiful planet? Why? I'm asking you guys, MIT, tell me why. And I've been asking everyone, because if I'm going to find it out anywhere, I feel like here might be a great place to start. And the only reason the only way I know how to find out this kind of thing is to look to the past, to look to the origins of things. So I'm always looking to the origins of language. I kind of trust words more if I know where they came from. It's like, if I'm picking that up, I want to know where it was first wrought. And David Abrams is a geophilosopher, he calls himself, but he's also a sleight of hand magician, and that makes me trust him greatly. Yeah. And he has a theory that perhaps this dislocation of intention between the human animal and the rest of the biosphere may have, he pinpoints the moment of the bifurcating of those two paths with the invention of the phonetic alphabet. He says the human animal was always the animal that sang the universe back to itself. However, in the beginning, it knew it was singing a tree back to a tree, or a mountain back to a mountain, or a stream back to a stream. In its earliest written languages, they were ideographic. So the ideograph for a mountain looked like a mountain. Or the ideograph for a deer had 2 antlers, and it looked like a deer. But when that deer became delta and was turned on its side like a D, it no longer was moored and anchored to its point of reference in the planet. And instead, this sort of mirror maze, this feedback loop between the letter D and the mouth is a sort of D. And that resonated with me to a degree. And it seems that beautiful as our language is, perhaps it's so beautiful that we sometimes, in our coding, in our language, in all of our ways of referring to the world, we sometimes get entranced in this glazed mirror maze and lose our feet of clay. And perhaps holding them both in equal equilibrium is the thing.
But, talking about your porosity, curiosity, and continuity, you also represent with your work a continuity amongst all the different creative disciplines. You told me something that I found super interesting, that the first time a work carried your signature as an author was 2016, even though you had already been in business for decades. So this idea of putting together design and the kind of utilitarian, or at least secondary role that a designer, especially a designer of a set, takes in theory, because he has to kind of express somebody else's idea. And instead art, which is considered in theory, once again, because your art is not that way, solipsistic and first and foremost coming from the self, show that the 2 or the 3 or the 4 can coexist, all the 11 dimensions. So how do you connect your work, for instance, for Gaga or for the U2 or even for different fashion companies with your work in art?
David Hockney, when he made a beautiful piece at the Light Room in London, really gorgeous, generous expression of his own practice, he gets to the part where he talks about his opera designs, and he loves his opera designs. He really enjoyed it. He said, the thing is, though, that collaboration is basically compromise. And I thought, okay, for you it is.
Not necessarily.
But I've never elaborated. I've only collaborated. That's all I've ever done. And I think most artists, that actually is true. Even the work that I make that's got my name on it as an artist, there are many people involved in making that stuff. And even if there aren't people involved in the immediate making of it, I am a firm subscriber to the Jorge Luis Borges phrase, I do not believe that I exist, actually. I am the sum total of every book I've ever read, everyone I've ever met, everyone I've ever loved, every street I've ever walked down. There is only collaboration. So this idea of the genius artist who has a light bulb up above their head, this is a really recent and temporary thing, I think. I think if you had walked into a temple or a church perhaps half a millennium ago, you would have smelt the incense, you would have seen the light coming in through the windows, you would have seen the paintings on the wall, the sculptures on the ceiling, heard the choral music. You wouldn't have said who's the composer, who's the artist, who made that scent, who was the architect. You would have just said, I'm here, this is my birthright, we're having a ritual. I subscribe to that, really.
The ritual and the being together. And the popular. When we were having a conversation today, we were talking about how at ease you feel in the popular sphere. Therefore, the sphere itself, concerts, and all sorts of experiences and situations where you're really in contact with many people. You talked about the audience as a species that you're really an expert at. So where does that come from, and how early did you find that out?
It's interesting because if there's one area I could say I'm an expert in, it is in being in an audience. And if there's one species I do know well, it is the audience. Even you right now, I've been sitting each day, haven't I, Anna? Hi, Anna. A different audience every day, and they're all different branches of the same species of the audience. Because when we're being an audience, we're doing something really particular. And more rare and unusual, I think, we are stilling the ego for the greater good at an appointed hour. We all decide to not have our phone on. We all decide to sit and partake as a group, being perhaps a kind of temporary society, a kind of temporary community. And I've sat within audiences. To begin with, my audiences were me and my 3 siblings. If you ask when it started, I was probably about 6. Under the stairs was our theatre, because it was dark whenever we wanted to. We could control the light. And I had 2 younger brothers and an older sister. So they were my audience and I was theirs. And my parents would show up when they wanted to. And then it got a bit bigger when I went and started making small theatre works above a pub in West London, about 75 people. And I did a lot of work like that. The first 10 years of my practice was small or medium-sized theatres or opera houses. The biggest audience until 2004 would have been about 1,500 people. And then it got bigger. And what I have learned is that the audience as a species is ridiculously intelligent. As a species, you make one pause, one beat, one tiny thing, one prop, one lighting effect, it registers immediately, it ripples, it's immediate. And you realize how we can operate as a group when we want to. And I will always enjoy working in situations like this, in stadia, where 100,000 people sing the same song. There's a great power in that.
Must be the most moving situation ever. And also, you just did the Super Bowl this year, the Kendrick Lamar. So, have you ever been scared?
Well, my work at that point, I guess I'm scared of things when I can control them. I'm anxious when I can change something. But when there's nothing I can do, by that point, watching this was actually the 2022 Super Bowl with Kendrick Lamar, Eminem, Snoop Dogg, and Mary J. Blige set in Compton. And there's 8 minutes to set the thing up. And I was watching, and actually the previous slide, the Olympic closing ceremony, there is 12 hours to set that up. but the trucks all parked in the wrong place. They got north, east, south, and west mixed up. And so actually, there was a central whole part of that design that no one ever saw. And the only reason that you see a full kind of exploded Union Jack is because I found the 8th segment of it in the dustbin. It had been thrown in the bin. And literally, the cameras were already rolling, and one of those slices was the green grass. I wasn't scared. I was just desperate. And this was back in 2012, where our little mobile phones had run out of steam, and I couldn't find anyone. I was just running around that whole thing and looking for this piece because no one could find it. And a health and safety person was worried that Usain Bolt might trip on it, so he'd got it out the way.
Oh, boy.
Because we hadn't stapled it down right.
Oh, God.
It could have been a catastrophe.
But so much can happen, right? We were discussing how one of your latest installations was in Milan during Design Week. I'm from Milan. It was a gorgeous week, and it was a gorgeous installation, which was a round library of books. You see it here, the Library of Light, inside the Pinacoteca of Brera. That also happened super quickly, right? Yeah. So you must be really ready for unforeseen circumstances and all these different changes, right?
This has been really moving, this piece. I walked into this extraordinary courtyard, and I visited the Pinacoteca di Brera. And if you have the opportunity and you're in Milan, I really strongly advise you to visit it. It's an extraordinary place full of wonders. A pinacoteca actually just means a storage box, and it's a storage house of very densely packed treasures. But you wouldn't know from walking into that courtyard what it holds. So I wanted to bring it out and get it to move. I also was looking around that courtyard. It's full of, you can see, illuminated statues of very brilliant scholars, but they were all men. And I wanted to find a lady. So I looked and looked, and I found a woman called Maria Gaetana Agnesi. And she was actually an incredibly important mathematician who invented something called the Vesiera di Agnesi, which was mistranslated as witch, but it actually was her curve. And she was looking into resonance. So I thought each of these men, these statues, was holding an instrument of enlightenment, a compass or a map or a book. So I thought I would give Maria Gaetana the biggest instrument of the lot. And this is her library. And I read out chunks of her book. She was actually a big mystic. She really fused mathematics and mysticism. She wrote a book called The Mystic Heaven, which is incredibly spiritual and devout. So I read chunks of that. And then we had Carlo Rovelli's Order of Time, read by Benedict Cumberbatch, and extracts from 250 of my favorite books, as well as 3,500 books were in that library. And yet it was half empty, because the main purpose of the library was to invite visitors to bring their own books, to contribute what they thought should be there, because who are we to say what books should be there? And at the end, when it finishes on May the 5th, all of those books will be donated to the Milan Public Library System.
So very sad that it's going to be gone May 5th, because it could stay there forever as far as I'm concerned. And also this library has a theme that is very recurrent in your work, which is the circle. I'm thinking not only many installations, but also your book that came out last year at the same time as an exhibition at Cooper Hewitt. I think that the curator,
Andrea's here.
Is also here. Is she here?
The curator of the Smithsonian exhibition.
It was a great exhibition, but the circle really recurs a lot in your work. And I remember when we had a conversation about the book, you talked about the circle and its importance. Can you tell us about it, please?
I think that what I've learned is if you invoke a form, you are a bit in that Borgesian way, standing on the shoulders of everyone who's ever invoked that form. And we may not feel that consciously, but there's a resonance. And actually, I guess what I've brought to some of the projects I've done in pop music and in other spheres is rather simple, of taking away lots of bits and pieces and playing the audience as an instrument and understanding that what the audience brings to each work is there as a material. And in fact, in a pop concert, the main material we're working with is the audience's experience of hymns, contemporary hymns that they already know. And that's the most interesting part, really. So in a shape like this, which is based on the labyrinth at Chartres, that is a shape that everybody kind of already knows. So you already have, it's a bit like playing a harmonic on a violin. If you just hover your finger above the E string in a particular place, it'll play the octave above. And if you do it really well, it might play the octave above that as well. And it might resonate through time and people's experience.
Probably, absolutely. You're so right about that. People recognize themselves in some of these shapes. They're familiar. And I don't want to monopolize Ez. So there are so many friends of Ez in the audience, and also so many people that might not yet be friends but really want to talk to her. So do you have questions that you would like to ask Ez? There's roving mics. You just have to raise your hand. And as you can see, it's about any of the 11 dimension goes. There's one here. Oh, there. Oh, yeah. Raise it high. Great. One is coming. Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. It's over there.
Welcome.
And if you could please also introduce yourselves, just your name, so we have direct contact.
Hi, I'm Basil. And when you were talking about wanting to diminish the perceived boundary between yourself and your environment, I was wondering if you've ever been faced with the less pleasant sides of human nature and felt an instinctive recoil and thought, oh no, I don't want to be porous with this side of people. And if you've encountered that, how you've dealt with it?
It's such a good and important question. Thank you. Her question, in case you couldn't hear it, was, have there been moments where I've been faced with a side of human nature that I didn't want to feel continuous with? Frequently is the answer. And it's complicated, isn't it? Because I love the Liebestod at the end of Tristan and Isolde. And if you happen to be in New York in February, please come, because we're doing it at the Met and it's going to be mind-blowing. But do I love everything that Wagner wrote? No, I do not.
Okay.
Right? And that's true of many of the artists with whom I have collaborated with, be they dead or alive. What to do about that? How to make those decisions. And it's really to do with, we are entangled in the systems that we wish to change. And we have those choices of, do we decide to be skeptical of change and its possibility, and therefore not engage with those systems that we want to change? Or do we risk being called hypocritical for engaging and entangling in systems that we wish to change? And I guess I'd rather be a hypocrite than a cynic or a skeptic. I don't know. It's really complicated. I think what I have learned is that there's always an overlap in lines of inquiry. We must urgently find common lines of inquiry with those who we do disagree with. This is urgent. If we can't do that, we're sunk. And we are a bit sunk.
There's somebody in the center, and there's somebody here next. So the lady, and then next people here.
Hi, Hannah Park, alum from here and a member of the Council for the Arts. So you've been here on campus for a week. As you walk around and experience MIT, are you inspired to think about a project you'd love to do here?
Absolutely. So here's what I want to do. Well, I've got a few. I have asked Professor Pavan Sinha if he could make me a time lapse of the evolution of the human brain. And I would like him, I didn't ask him this yet, but I would like him to make a diptych, the evolution of the planet next to the evolution of the human brain. So I would like to have them as a diptych. That's thing one. The next thing is the drawings that the students have been making, and the community, not just the students. I would like that to be an ongoing practice. an ongoing, like the picture of Dorian Gray, a self-portrait of MIT that continues to redraw itself forever. And it can live as one small image. Someone here is going to be clever enough to work it out that whenever anyone draws a stranger, it'll get uploaded to this ever-evolving image. So that's two. And I think it would be interesting to, in each department, install a philosopher, an existential philosopher, or a research in the moral and ethical aspect of each line of inquiry. And I think that is going on an awful lot. But I think the more that happens, that could, with the fusions that you're already practicing here, if you were to introduce that aspect as well, it could literally change the world.
Over here. And then I'll come to you.
Hi, Sally Yu. I'm also a member of the Council for the Arts and co-chair for the award dinner with Sheila sitting behind me. I'm a big fan of your work. I went to see your exhibit at the Cooper Hewler. It was amazing. So thank you for being so generous with your time, spending a whole week on campus. My question is regarding Gen AI. How do you see your work being augmented or changed potentially if you were sitting here in 2050?
That's a fantastic question, and maybe Heidi should flick through some of the images of the AI work that I've engaged in. The second part of your question, how do I see my work being changed? I guess I view AI as, with great respect, as an other. In the way that I don't understand the intelligence of mycelium or trees, or a lot of what's going on here. I view it with great respect, like I view the sea. I'm quite scared of the sea. My earliest memories of nearly drowning. But I love the sea. I like swimming in it, just out of my depth, but not too far. And I like being on it in a boat, navigated by someone who knows how to row the boat or sail the boat, which is not me. But I have a profound respect for it as an other intelligence. And instinctively, when my children try to mock Alexa, I say, don't do that. I don't think that's a good idea. Be nice. And I had the pleasure of sitting opposite Tommaso Poggio, who should perhaps talk a bit more to this than I, but we asked him the same question last night, having been at the absolute instigation of the AI research in this building and the bringing of neuroscience to computer science here. I asked him, had the evolution of AI surprised him? Are we now where he thought we might be when he started this in 1981? And he said it was beyond anything he had expected. And he also said he was slightly scared. So if Tommaso's scared, it would be wrong of me not to be. That said, my own experiments in AI began not because I probably even knew the words AI. I wasn't really thinking about it. But I was asked to make a work at the Serpentine, and I wanted to make a collective artwork. So I said, can we make a collective poem? And this is the first result, which was everybody entering a photo booth and donating one word and a collective poem. It's actually still being written online since 2016. It's a very long, quite basic, but very long poem that's being contributed to for all those years. And that led on to a collective Christmas carol at the V&A, where everybody contributed word to a collective carol, and then on to a collective protest in Trafalgar Square against the Brexit vote, which I disagreed with. And I wanted to see what the lion in Trafalgar Square would think of it, one of the lions. So I painted it red, and everybody queued up and fed it words, and it spouted poetry up Nelson's column every night. And that led to the UK Pavilion at the World Expo, which was the only building there that wrote poetry. Some people complained that the poetry wasn't great. And I said, well, it's better than any of the other buildings' poetry. And I guess what I'd like to do next with the portraiture is to be able to make national portraits that are co-owned and co-authored by anyone who wants to take part. I'm interested in the scale that can be reached. I'm interested really in a very utopic way of the progression from single cell to multi-cell creatures and societies of creatures that we are. Is there any way that the AI can help us be an 8 billion strong intention for good? That's my utopic view of it. That's what I dream of for AI. And I think really my strongest feeling about it is like Peter Pan, who lost his shadow, to ask Wendy to stitch it back onto his feet so he could dance with it.
The lady with the blue sweater, please, over there, great. And Heidi, you're doing such a great job. It's amazing with the slides. Seriously, I mean, they pop up exactly what they're needing. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Malayo. I'm an undergraduate student in theater arts and mechanical engineering. And one question I wanted to ask you was kind of about how your time, like, it was about the topic of time and all the ideas that you have. Like, for me personally, I feel like I have so many different artistic ideas. And by choosing to pursue one of those ideas, you're having to put other ideas on the back burner. And for example, like you mentioned that you spent 4 months on your drawings. Do you ever feel that, like, how do you deal with the feeling that you might be neglecting ideas, and that because there's only so much time that we all have, like, that we might not get to the ideas, we might not explore ideas that could have fruited into something like really amazing? That was long.
FOMO. Artistic FOMO.
Damien Hirst called one of his artworks, "I want to be everywhere, all at once, with everyone, one-to-one, now and forever." And the artwork was a ping pong ball being held in the air in suspension by a hairdryer. So that is a good title for all of us. And the way that I've rationalized this, I've thought about this quite a lot, is instead of worrying about being fragmented into doing many things, I see it all as one movie with different scenes. And if I were doing a play, there was a play we worked on years ago in 2013 called Chimerica, and it was a revolving box, and it just kept going round. It only had 4 sides, but it had to deliver 64 different scenes. And I thought, okay, well, if I could do 64 scenes for one play, then I can do 64 scenes for one day. And I just see, I think it actually really helped me to work with Andrea on the Cooper Hewitt retrospective, and to work deeply with her on the book, and I really strongly advise you, as soon as you can, to write your book, because you thread yourself together like a necklace of raindrops. You just need to thread it together, and you will find that there is an emerging line of inquiry. And as long as you are continually coming back to the spine of that, then it can sprout as many branches. In the Forest of Us piece, the first line I say in it is, "Whenever I meet a fork in the road, I take both paths, and then I take both again at the next division. The more my roads divide and multiply, the more I offer myself to the air."
Is there any of the people that participated in the version of Congregation of the Portraits here at MIT that would like to concisely tell us about their experience? Or you're all very shy? If not, I can go to a next question, or I can ask a question myself. But if anybody would have the daring of telling us about their experience, it would be fantastic. Questions? If not, I have a question for you. I would like to talk. Oh, there is a question. I didn't see it. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. I was pleased to see some screenshots from the Lady Gaga performance, because I was actually there 2 weeks ago, and it was a truly extraordinary experience.
Did you have a good time?
I had a good time.
Phew. I have to, after he's told the story, I'm going to tell a funny story about someone who had a really bad time.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Not at that show, at a different one, sorry.
It struck me that the set had a dominant color, which is red, and it seems like in a lot of your works, there's sort of an intentional frugality of color, form, and texture. There's usually one dominant color, one dominant form, one dominant texture. you speak a little bit more about your philosophy of that? Is that intentional, or does that just kind of happen organically?
It's a great question. I think there's so much to take in. Like form, I'm just getting my head around form. So I think we are constantly looking at a cajillion. I mean, I don't know as much about the physics of how the eye works, but I think it's something to do with rods and cones. And I think the rods and cones are constantly bouncing up and down, trying to judge form, trying to judge color. It's all going on all the time. Everything all at once, one-to-one, all the time. So if I can just take one piece at a time, just look with me at red. Look how great red is. Red is great. Let's look at red. Red is extraordinary. What does red make you think? Let's just look at red for a while. Let's look at red. And now let's look at this form. We don't need color for now. When we put together the book with Andrea, we struggled. I had struggled even for 5 years before meeting her, and then we struggled for 2 years to find a way to present information that was nourishing rather than exhausting. And we are exhausted a lot of the time, I think, visually. We're exhausted, or we are strenuously avoiding being exhausted. And the way that I arranged the book in the end was to have the whole first chunk of the book all about form, and then to move through the colors sequentially. And that's why. It's to try to nourish without exhausting. That's why. I will tell you the funny story about someone who didn't like the show. So, this was at the end. It's a funny story. Angela will cut this bit out, by the way, of the recording. Anyway. It was the end of a U2 concert in London at the O2 Arena. I'm afraid we don't have it in the deck, but you could go to the Sphere or something. Go to the Sphere. And this particular concert was actually on the inside. If you go on the inside one, it was as if you'd taken this audience, and instead of putting the stage at the end, we had put it right down the center. We were trying to evoke a road, a life, and it was a rather autobiographical show. And we went through the band's life in this road, and we were very proud of ourselves because we felt that everyone had a great view. No one was too far away. We'd put it right in the center, this big, long, rectangular screen in the middle. And when we left the concert, we decided not to take the car that had been provided because we thought it'd be much quicker to go on the subway. I had a small child on my shoulders. My mum and dad were with me. They had another child. Children were crying, I think, because they were tired. So we were queuing up to get on the subway because you have to queue, because it's so full. And my mum started to show off. And my mum started showing off to the guy next to her. And she said, "This is my daughter. She designed the show." And they clearly thought she was a complete lunatic because anyone who had designed this show clearly wouldn't be standing there looking bedraggled in the rain with a crying child on their shoulder, queuing up for the subway. Clearly this woman was deranged. And she showed off for a while, and we're stuck in this queue next to the people she's been showing off to. And eventually, one of them said, "Well, I had a terrible time." And he said, because I was sat at the short end of this long block that you put.
Oh my God, of course.
So there were rubbishy seats, which were sold apparently very cheaply. They were kind of listening seats. But the touts had got hold of them and sold them perhaps for more. And so we had to stand next to this guy who'd had a really bad time for about another 40 minutes. My mum turned away from him and started showing off to someone else.
Yes, exactly.
But what I will say is, when people say what drives you, or how do you learn, how do you progress, it is through. Someone asked me about fear, but it's through humiliation. That was profoundly humiliating. And when you sit in an audience and something goes wrong, which it does, or something just isn't what it should be, it's of course the audience, coming back to where we started, this intelligent creature, it knows when it hasn't quite worked.
Yeah, talking about something going wrong, we were having a conversation about the beginning of this big concert and the first The Beatles concert that was such a disaster. Because you were talking about the fact that the successful concerts that you do lead intimacy into a large scale, right? And can you tell us, because I didn't know about it before, but like the first big concert and what was learned from it?
Actually, this image is precisely the right one. This was the first night at the Sphere, and these were animals of Nevada that we arrayed as a sort of cathedral to those species. And this was the end of the concert, and Bono made a speech to Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was sitting in the audience, and he thanked him. And what we had been discussing for a few months before this was the origin of the art form of the pop concert. Because it's quite a young art form. We might trace the roots of theatre back to 6 BC. We might trace the roots of opera back to the 17th century. But the roots of the pop concert can be traced, I think, or the mass-scale pop concert could be traced quite precisely to 1965. And they are precisely a point of conjunction between 4 men who came from Liverpool, who had particular lives and experienced particular joys, pains, experiences, and had found ways of singing about them, and conjunct with a piece of technology called the television that had become proliferated in every living room in America, particularly watched by young women. So young women and men, but a lot of women, watching the TV in their living room had become closely encountered with this poetry, an intimate encounter through a glass box in a TV with the poetry of 4 men. And so when the Beatles got off their plane and came to America, the audience was expecting that. They were hoping for intimacy with the people they'd been so intimately connected with through this glass box. So they turned up at Shea Stadium in their number because this is the only time so far in history that this has been required, that a band have needed that size of place to play. And of course, it's a catastrophe because the art form hasn't been invented yet. The need was there, but the art form hadn't been made. So no one can hear the Beatles because the sound system wasn't figured out. No one could see them because no one had thought about a screen with a camera or anything. And the audience was screaming so loudly, the Beatles were terrified, and the whole thing was a catastrophe. And actually what Bono said to Paul McCartney that night was, in all of those years since 1965, we've just been trying to perfect the medicine for that terrible night you had.
It's so fascinating. So has any of the participants of the portrait experiment mustered the courage to tell us about it? No. Well, all right, we'll find you later. We'll find you later. Is there anything that you want to leave our MIT audience with? Some pearl of wisdom about the role of art and about porosity and continuity and about the need to really face your bias? I'm just putting together everything that I gathered from our conversations. Is there anything that you want to leave MIT with?
Well, I think really I want to come back to thanking
I want to come back.
Mary for making this award possible. It's a profound honor. And to actually thank Andrea Lips, who I think without her belief, Andrea came to me in 2017. And I always remember the way I'm standing when I meet people. You were here, weren't you? She was on my left, I was on the right. And we were looking at a work that I had made in New York. And she said, I work at the Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt. Can I have a sketch? And I said, let's do a show. And that was in 2017. And it took us 5 years to get it together. But I think if I hadn't made that show, I'm not sure that the committee here would have been aware of my practice. So thank you to you, Andrea. Thank you to Dario Calmesi for being here as well. Dario and I gave a talk when I was making that work, which really helped to elucidate the practice. And thank you, Mary, for making this award possible and making my week here possible, because I won't forget it. A lot of it is seeds planted in the imagination that will grow and surface years and years. Like the James Gleich book I read in 2003, I made that work in 2021. So there's been so much that's been planted here that will reverberate through my practice. I cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, a week at MIT leaves a mark, that I can tell you. So as you told me that your favorite description of you was by, you'll tell me afterwards by whom, but she said that you have a mind that is at the same time forensic and associative, which is very true. You're able to go deep. You're not T-shaped. You're not I-shaped. You're like pan-shaped. You're like a big circle that extends. It's been wonderful to get a little taste of you tonight, a little taste of your mind that you were thinking, and to share it with our audience, your favorite species. And I am so happy to know you and so happy to have had a chance to be here with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Yeah. Well done.
So just on behalf of the McDermott Award folks, you know, as Paola is very much part of the MIT family, and now you are. And with that, there'll be an expectation that
You've got my brain. No one. I gave it for life to it.
well, you made it clear that your brain is really worth something for us. But we want to have you back again and again, both of you. You're fantastic, and you do for the arts and for culture and for art, science, and technology wonders. So I thank you on behalf of our community, and this is your new home. Come on back. Thank you, everyone.